Well, let me tell you about RAND for those of you who don't know who we are. So, RAND is a not for profit, nonpartisan research institute. We have about 2,000 people who work around the world. Our headquarters are in Santa Monica, and you are in our Pittsburgh office, which is our third largest domestic office. We have about 300 people here, about half of whom are researchers. Collectively, across RAND, we spend about half of our time on national security issues and half on social and economic policy issues. And we have in this office, about half of us are researchers, and we're connected to about 500 projects. And of those, about 10 are regionally focused. Those are the ones I'm most proud of. So if you have any questions about those projects or anything else we do at RAND, I'll be around after our conversation tonight. Okay, so now for the housekeeping, just three quick things. Restrooms, you just want to keep turning right. Leave this room, take a right past the elevators, right on the hallway, right into the restrooms. So when you get there, you can open that door, but don't open any other doors on your way, or you will set off an alarm. Housekeeping issue number 2, our parking garage closes at 8. It's not a nice place to sleep. So if you did park down there, make sure you're heading into the elevators by about 7:45. And then most importantly, when we get to the Q&A section of tonight's discussion, which is going to happen pretty soon in about 25 minutes, we will be passing microphones around. So be sure to pose your question into a mic because we are streaming this on Facebook and people will not be able to hear your question otherwise. Okay, so most importantly, I want to next introduce Salim Gabriel. So Salim is the chair of the board of the World Affairs Council. He and I serve on that board together, and unfortunately for me, he rolls off in December, but that is after 10 years of service to the council. He is also the executive director of the Pittsburgh Promise. I moved here from Santa Monica in 2007, and the Promise was just being launched then, and I heard a lot about it and about Salim, and I just pictured him as a very important person who would always travel with an entourage and have no time for anyone who's not also similarly important. And then I met him, and I can say he is one of the kindest, most generous, most appreciative humans in Pittsburgh. He also has 5 grandsons, and a couple of weeks ago, he turned 63. And I mention that because he commemorated that by riding 63 miles on his bike. So please join me in welcoming this fit, fine man to the podium.
Catherine, you are a generous friend, and I am honored to be able to call you that. And what Catherine did not tell you is that tomorrow we have our annual board meeting for the World Affairs Council, and her life could possibly change tomorrow. She is on the agenda to be elected the next vice chair of the board of the World Affairs Council, and it's going to be very contentious. And because the current vice chair refuses to leave that seat and is calling everything we do rigged. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Catherine, for hosting us, providing amazing space and great food prepared by Salim without an extra E. Salim's Market prepared the food for us tonight, and thank you, Salim, for doing that. Good of you all to take time to be here, to be a part of this conversation. The council exists in order to facilitate convening and connecting of people around global issues with the hope that we end up with a world that is good and just and equitable for all. As we look around us, it doesn't feel like we're there. It feels like we have a long distance to go before that happens. But that's why we need to have these conversations, and it's great that you're here to be a part of that. Tonight's evening is co-sponsored, and we're thankful to Neighborhood Allies and to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce for co-hosting this event with the council. I need to also thank the John T. Ryan Memorial Fund. That's a fund established at the council and funded by the Ryan family to support events like this. So thank you, Ryan family, for making this happen. So 2 of my favorite people in the world are sitting on stage right now. One is a relatively new favorite. I've not known Ariel for that long. And the other one is a long-term favorite. Gabby, whom I've known for a long time. So I'll start by introducing Ariel. Dr. Ariel Armony, he is the Vice Chancellor of Global Affairs at the University of Pittsburgh and the Director of the University Center for International Studies. Two very big and very important jobs at a very significant institution. And he happens to also be the co-author of the book that we're going to be talking about tonight, Emerging Global Cities. Gabriella, Gabby, is currently a program officer at the Richard King Mellon Foundation, focusing on matters of employment, workforce development, equity, economic mobility, et cetera. But she was here in this space a few years back, and for a number of years, a senior researcher with RAND, and she was here in the Pittsburgh office with RAND, but prior to that, she was in Qatar with RAND, and before that, Santa Monica with RAND. That's like very kind of diverse places for Gabby to practice her expertise. And the themes that are part of the book that we'll be talking about tonight are central to not only her academic and intellectual interests, her doctoral work, her dissertation, her research, but also things that matter to her on a very personal level. So you are up for a treat. Would you mind just helping us warm up this evening, getting it started right by welcoming to the stage Dr. Armony and Dr. Gonzalez.
Well, thank you all very much. Again, I'm Gabriella Gonzalez. First, Ariel, I want to just let you know I devoured this book, and I'm going to hold it up. In case you haven't had a chance to read this, maybe I'm the only one who stays up late at night reading nonfiction about emerging global cities, but it really struck something in my soul. And part of it really was the way that you and your co-authors really helped unfold a very nuanced story about development and international relations and what it really means to be part of this society that we call on Earth. So I just wanted to start just to kind of get us all grounded, if we could help me out, Ariel, in defining terms. What exactly is a global city, and how does that differ from an emerging global city?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. Thank you for hosting us. It's such a pleasure to be with the World's Affairs Council. And I wanted to say that Betty Cruz, the CEO who leads the council, is in Washington, D.C. right now, receiving an important award. And so it's great. It's great that she's not here because she's receiving this wonderful award. So let me get right to your question. A global city is not defined by its size, it's defined by its function. And this is a term that Saskia Sassen coined decades ago. And essentially, a global city plays a command and control role for financial and commercial decisions that extend worldwide. Sassen identified 3 cities as global cities: New York, London, and Tokyo. It's fascinating to think that communication and transportation innovation allowed for the decentralization of industrial production and commercial activities. But it did not lead to the decentralization of decisions about these activities. That is, there was a need to concentrate in a physical space those key players who make decisions about investment, about how commercial and financial issues are being dealt with. And they had to be close to each other. This is why banks, large consulting firms, legal firms, all started to come to these particular places. So these are, by definition, the established global cities. Now, With the evolution of the capitalist world economy, it was thought that the emergence of these global cities essentially marked the end of that evolution. However, what we identify in this book is a new chapter. That is, the world economy needed other players to play this role, but in their respective regions. So here is where we see the emergence of a set of cities that we identify, again, 3 cities, Miami, Dubai, and Singapore, that play this role of command and control centers, but within their respective regions. And one more thing to add is that what's fascinating is that these 3 cities, in a very short period of time, emerged to these positions of prominence virtually from nothing. Singapore was a fishing village. Miami was a place for mostly older people from the Northeast to escape the frigid temperatures. And Dubai was a small village, mainly with sand and water. And within just a few decades, these places emerged to have these positions in the global economy.
Great, thank you, Ariel. So I found it fascinating how you and your co-author, Alejandro Portes, were able to really unpack and note what inspired you analytically, sort of considering the physical resemblances of Dubai and Singapore and Miami first, and then diving deeper into the economic and cultural significance of each of these cities in the region, and then thinking about the global appeal for investment and wealth and lifestyle. So analytically, this all made sense. And I'm wondering if you could share with us whether there were any personal factors that really inspired you to do this study. Any significant experiences that you could share with us?
Yes. So before coming to Pittsburgh and taking over this position, I was at the University of Miami. I was the founding director of the Miami Institute for the Advanced Study of the Americas. And there in Miami, I met my co-author, Alejandro Portes, who was teaching half the year in Princeton and half the year at the University of Miami. And we worked together and published a book on Miami, The Global Edge, Miami in the 21st Century. And this was in the summer of 2018. After that, Alejandro went to Abu Dhabi to teach a course at New York University's campus there in Abu Dhabi. And Abu Dhabi is only an hour from Dubai, so he would go often to Dubai and started writing to me and saying, there are so many similarities to Miami here. I mean, the buildings, the malls, the real estate market, this is really, really similar. So then in early 2019, he came here to Pittsburgh where we presented the book on Miami and started to have these conversations and started to talk about a third city, Singapore, where also we saw these similarities. This was a first event, so the first part of the story. The second was that as a result of my job, which is a very difficult job because I get to travel all around the world, I got to meet lots of people in government, business, nonprofit sector, etc. And there was one similarity, that everywhere I went, these leaders were eager to project their cities, to brand their cities, to talk about the visibility of their cities and the importance of their cities and the drive to bring investors, talent. And I saw this as a global conversation. People were talking, everybody was talking about the same thing. And so when we connected these similarities with this global conversation, we said, there is a project here. And that is how the project started.
So would you say branding then is one of the key factors in rising cities that they should
This
advertise
is
themselves?
absolutely, absolutely. This is something that we discuss in detail in the book. This is a world, in a very important way, of cities. Cities compete with each other. And it is a world where cities strive to brand themselves. It's absolutely crucial. I recently published an op-ed in the Miami Herald on a topic that, if you think about branding, is kind of obvious, which is the fact that Lionel Messi signed with Inter Miami. And I talk about these two brands, the Messi brand and the Miami brand. And if you pay a little bit of attention to this, you will start seeing how the Miami brand has exploded throughout the world. It's not a US market. It's not. It was interesting because at the beginning, some commentators in the US were saying, well, but at the end of the day, a majority of people in the US don't really care about soccer. And of course, Inter Miami, but they were talking about sort of the general public.
Yes, I know.
No.
I know.
And the thing is that they were completely wrong because really it doesn't matter. This is a global
Phenomenon.
audience. It's a global phenomenon. And those of us who care about Inter Miami and the league now and watch it and are part of a global audience.
Yeah, so I wanted to highlight your noting of, or commenting about branding because we do have a representative from Visit Pittsburgh here. So I just wanted to say that we're all really interested in making sure that Pittsburgh sort of lands in a good space. I also wanted to note that, just on a personal note, of all the cities that you, in your case studies that you mentioned here, Miami is actually the only city I've not been to, which is I'm a little bit embarrassed about that right now. Okay, so I wanted to dive a little bit more into the meat of the analysis. You note that the three cities did not happen by chance, but rather were, and I quote, a consequence of decisive and sustained efforts by key actors. What I really appreciated with the case study analyses that you do is that it's clear that there's no one formula except for these sustained efforts. And so could you just unpack a little bit about what do you mean by the key actors and the sustained efforts, and what are the preconditions really for global emergence?
So something that I want to say very clearly, because it's really important in this book and in this project, is that we are not interested in offering a recipe. This is not a recipe. And we are not idealizing these cities. There are many problems with these cities. And so this is not that kind of book that will tell you the how-to, because that is what we want to achieve. Having said that, what we looked at are the similarities between these cities. And there are 4 factors that were very important. First, the geography of these cities, taking advantage of their location. These are, for example, cities with major ports that then expanded to be major transportation hubs with huge airports, first element. Second, a strong will on the part of local elites to develop a vision for these cities. Very, very important that they had a clear sense of what they wanted to achieve. Third, the implementation of the necessary institutional reforms to guarantee that the institutional mechanisms that provide safety, predictability, and certainty for investors were there. This is very, very important because these cities build what they are, build their financial systems, mainly with the money coming from abroad. Miami, Latin America, mainly. Singapore, Southeast Asia, the Middle East in the case of Dubai. So they provide a legal and judicial system that guarantees that if I'm going to bring my money there, my money is safe. And finally, something that is very important, and particularly these days, immigration. That is, the role of immigrants in these three cities was absolutely crucial. You talked about Miami. If I may, very quickly, I can tell you the Miami story starts because after the Cuban Revolution, a group of Cuban exile bankers went to Miami, and years later, they developed a vision. They wanted Miami to be that natural, logical space, the place where banks that wanted to set up their headquarters for Latin America will go, and where initially the wealthy class in Latin America, and then broadening that to upper middle class and middle class, will see Miami as a place to park their assets. That was the vision, to make Miami that place.
So I did get the notice that we have 7 minutes left. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit just for us to talk. You guys will have more time. So let's talk a little bit about Pittsburgh. In your estimation, could Pittsburgh consider becoming a more global city? And notice how I'm using very broad, flowery language. I'm very curious about what economic, social, cultural elements Pittsburgh would need in order to become this type of force, really, for the region or maybe for the world.
So I definitely think that Pittsburgh needs to become more global. And the future of Pittsburgh is tied to the vision of becoming more global. I don't say that Pittsburgh needs to replicate these cases, absolutely not. Pittsburgh can have its own trajectory, but it needs to have a lot more global reach. And let me focus on one thing. Mm-hmm. I was thinking it's very interesting that I talked about the concept of global cities and how, while the decentralization of industrial production, something that of course changed Pittsburgh, okay, was happening, was possible, but at the same time, the decisions about investment and trade had to be concentrated. Pittsburgh is not playing that game. Mm-hmm. Pittsburgh has the potential to become a powerhouse in innovation and knowledge production. And interestingly, those in that sector, researchers, inventors, entrepreneurs, investors, need to be close to each other. It's the same phenomenon. People need to be in a same physical space. So there is that possibility for Pittsburgh.
Because we are geographically a little more concentrated, that have that co-location of ideas and connections?
It's because we have initially an incredible asset, which is the so-called innovation district, Oakland, where we are. Let me give you very quickly some numbers here. The Oakland district is 1.7 square miles. It represents 3% of Pittsburgh's land area. Here, 10% of Pittsburgh's population live. But 30% of the jobs in Pittsburgh are here. But then if we move to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, a third of university research and development expenditures are within these 1.7 square miles. And this is 350% the average, national average of academic R&D expenditures here. It is an incredible asset. What's not working for us, and then we can talk more about that, is that it's difficult to get to Pittsburgh, even though there are so many renovations at the airport. It's very difficult to get to Pittsburgh. It's difficult to drive to New York. We know, we do it all the time. This is a whole conversation that we can have where I believe that while that physical proximity is important, we need to start thinking about some flexibility there, because I believe that with virtual and augmented reality, we can start having something new. And as you know, this is an area where there is tremendous work being done here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, great, thank you. How about some, I was gonna ask my last question. Okay. How about, It's okay. How about some pitfalls of going down this route of having Pittsburgh be a more global city? Is there anything that we should be aware of or take note of and hopefully address before they happen?
So, one obvious one, we talked about immigration. I was looking at the numbers. The percentage of foreign-born population as a percentage of the entire population in this whole area, the region of Pittsburgh, is 4.1%. The national average is 13.5%. Okay, that gives you a sense. More than a century ago, Pittsburgh was at the very top in foreign-born population. So it was, at a time, a very different city. I don't know, I don't think I need to convince this audience, but you know that one thing that immigrants bring is that these are risk-taking newcomers. And these cities show that this is something that works. Now, there's another side to this, where there are serious inequalities in these cities. And by definition, what we have seen in terms of the global city is that, to start with, we have a situation where at the top, we have those in finance, in law, in consulting that make a lot of money, and these are few. And then at the bottom, we have a large number of people. It's a semi-pro and proletariat that makes it from paycheck to paycheck, that they live in very unstable conditions, close to poverty. Still, the jobs are many times better than in their countries, where they cannot get jobs, and they can send money back to their families. But by definition, it's very important to understand that the established global cities and these cities that we discuss here have that kind of socioeconomic structure. And that is a serious problem.
Yeah. Not one we would want to replicate here in Pittsburgh, for sure.
Well, here in Pittsburgh, as you know, we have a very, very serious problem, which is racial socioeconomic inequality. And the city is trying to address these. Universities are the two, particularly the two largest universities, and I know the University of Pittsburgh is working very hard on this matter, but this is something that we need to address. But as we globalize, the benefits are more jobs, more investment, a larger tax base for community programs, and the possibility to focus on education and training a new workforce. And that's a way to incorporate these marginalized, underprivileged sectors of the population.
Great. Well, thank you, Ariel. I'm going to stop peppering you with my questions and allow the audience to do so. Just a reminder, please use the microphone, and you can raise your hand. I'll call on you, or the runner will.
I'm going to go to who I saw first.
Great.
So I had a question regarding how Miami built its branding. So in the late 20th and early 21st century, a lot of portrayals of Miami in the media focused on violent crime. How did Miami fight back and push back against that to build its branding?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. A way to understand this, how the brand is built, is to look at the 4 pillars in the economy of these cities. First is the banking and financial sector, where Miami has been growing to the point that in terms of concentration of banking and financial institutions is on the East Coast, second only to Wall Street. Second, we have Miami and these cities as transportation hubs, trade, where you have the ports and you have the airports. Then the real estate market, that is construction starting to happen, attracting foreign buyers. And finally, and this is very important to your question, is culture, the arts, and sports. So equally important for Miami in terms of developing its financial and banking sector, which started to attract talent and people from other areas, was the decision to bring the Art Basel exhibit, the festival, from Switzerland to Miami and start making that a feature of what Miami is. Music, the museums, these elements, in addition to tourism, started to change that perception of Miami. And this is how Miami started to change and build a different brand. Let me add one thing. The challenge for Miami these days, and I was there a couple of weeks ago talking to more than 500 business people, is that Miami, interestingly, still doesn't see itself as this global player. They still think of Miami as, we are not quite there. We still are kind of, a superficial city. And this is, I was telling them, this is your next step. You need to start thinking globally. And as I mentioned, the deal with Messi, and of course you have the Miami Heat, you have these kinds of things are going to help that brand to start having that global appeal. But this is how brands change, with the integration of these different elements, not just with a marketing campaign.
The woman in purple here. Yeah, for, soft purple and then the darker purple. How's that?
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk, and thank you, Gabriella, for your penetrating questions and your insight into how to manage this. My question actually is primarily to Dr. Armony, but also a nod to your work as well. Ariel, you mentioned 4.1% of foreign-born population in the region compared to 13.5% national of those who are foreign and come to the United States. It's a very interesting contrast. On the one hand, it's discouraging that there aren't more foreign visitors coming here, foreign born
Residents
coming here, yeah. On the other hand, where but in Pittsburgh is there such a long historical legacy of welcoming immigrants, of finding a place for them here to stay here generation after generation? We only have to remember the Andy Warhol family and so forth, and the legacy that they've struck and the centrality of that. So my question is this an opportunity now that we're experiencing the largest immigration into the United States since World War II with Ukraine and with the surrounding region? Could this be an opportunity for Pittsburgh to benefit from that migration? I know that Richard King Mellon, for example, is very active in looking for opportunities to integrate some of those immigrants into the United States, but could it have resonance for Pittsburgh as well as a place that's known as a welcoming city? Thank you.
So, first, the short answer is a very emphatic yes. Yes, this is an extraordinary time for Pittsburgh. And we are seeing that, for example, with the Latina population that has been growing from very low numbers, very, very low numbers, but has been growing incredibly in just a few years. These are immigrants from other parts of the United States that have come to Pittsburgh, many of them during the Trump administration, because this was a safe city. This was a welcoming city. We need to keep these people. We need to keep these new residents here because, as we know, a lot of this internal migration is promoted, happens through networks. So when people know that there are jobs here, this is a welcoming city, it's safe for immigrants, there are opportunities for their children, there is no violence or no very high levels of violence like in other cities, housing is still affordable. All those elements become extremely important for the possibility of bringing more immigrants to this city. And this is really, really important. One very quick element where we should be doing a lot more, and the universities need to do a lot more, is that we have lots of international students. I know that it's difficult for them to get H-1B visas and the residency, but we live in a transnational world. It's possible to maintain connections with Pittsburgh and go back to your country and develop businesses that incorporate this city. There are many opportunities in that sense that I think that as a city, we are not leveraging.
Thank you for your talk. My question is about sustainability. Because if I look at the original 3 global cities that were identified before, New York, London, Tokyo, what strikes me with the emerging global cities that you've identified, particularly Miami and Dubai, is a question of the future and sustainability, places with maybe too much water or too little water, and potentially not a good long-term plan. So I just wonder if you could speak a little bit to those issues and how they influence decisions that are being made in these cities.
That's a great question. This is something we discuss in the book. These cities face existential threats, and these existential threats are the result of climate change. So rising sea levels are absolutely dangerous and a very, very important challenge for these cities. And these 3 cities are responding in very different ways to this threat. Miami, for example, is a city that has not come to terms with good solutions. This is something that it's not only about the future, and I can mention very quickly the future, is affecting a number of factors and the socioeconomic fabric of the city as we speak. For example, what we see now is the phenomenon that we call climate gentrification, where elevated areas in the city that a couple of decades ago or a decade ago were worth nothing or very little, now are worth significantly more money, and therefore the population that live there, they are being pushed to other parts of the city because these are now safe places to build new luxury condominiums, etc. Now, into the future, what we know, there are many studies that show that there is going to be a massive displacement of people around the world, but in the United States, within the United States, what we call climate migrants. 40% of the US population live in coastal areas that are prone to flooding and the impact of rising waters. These people will have to move to other places. And here's a very interesting challenge for Pittsburgh. On the one hand, Pittsburgh will be a very attractive place. Geography. Things change all the time because Pittsburgh, in comparison to other cities, is not as exposed to extreme climate events. But at the same time, we know that cities that are in this position may be eventually overwhelmed by these waves of new internal migrants. How will these cities prepare for that? People are already talking about, for example, two cities, Houston and Austin. That is, not coastal cities, but cities that will receive many internal migrants, and how are these cities going to cope with that? So there are possibilities for Pittsburgh, but at the same time, the city needs to be planning, needs to be thinking about the next 20, 50 years.
Absolutely. Take the woman in, sorry, I don't know everybody's names, so with the glasses wearing black.
Thanks. I'm one of the 4.1%. And I came from what I thought was a global city till I walked in this room. I'm from Montreal. So, and I love Pittsburgh. I've been here almost 40 years. The question that I have is, so these key success factors, these 4 factors that you mentioned, how interchangeable are they? How easy is it to swap one out for another? What I hear, I work for Jewish Healthcare Foundation. We strongly believe in safety and technology, and there's so much possibility for Pittsburgh to build up that sector as its thing, but we don't have financial investors here that are helping these startup companies and others. We hear that all the time. So the question is, we have culture in this city. We may have eds and meds and technology in the city. Are there enough ingredients here for us to build something devoid of us having the ports and the airports? Or unless you have those key things, you shouldn't even get in the game?
Thank you for the question, because it's a hugely difficult question. Yeah. Very difficult. So I appreciate it. It's I'll do my best trying to answer this question. You touch on a very important element, which is VC capital, particularly early stage capital. Pittsburgh is way below any kind of standard. We don't attract that kind of capital. Here is where I would connect this to an earlier question about the brand of the city and telling the story of this city. When we think about Pittsburgh, I don't know if you all will agree, but if we say, please tell me one word that you associate with Pittsburgh, it's very likely that you will say Steelers. But and I appreciate, the coming back, but I can tell you that when I visit different cities around the world,
True.
it will be very unlikely that people will say robotics or that people will say arts and culture. That's my experience. But your comments actually point in that direction. That is what we need for people to be thinking about. And somebody mentioned Andy Warhol. The Andy Warhol Museum here is as far as I understand, the museum that attracts more out-of-town visitors. One of the most brilliant things that I saw in terms of promoting the Pittsburgh brand was when Eric Shiner was the director of the Andy Warhol Museum and organized an Andy Warhol exhibit in Seoul, in South Korea. Everyone, key people in Seoul was there at the exhibit. And it was about Andy Warhol, but it was about Pittsburgh. And people were learning about Pittsburgh and thinking about Pittsburgh in terms of arts and culture, for example. So we need here a vision. We need a value proposition that is not anchored in the past. And we need to bring together some existing players that are working together, but other players, and really craft that vision and that value proposition. One, my final thing. I almost didn't come to Pittsburgh. I was ready to come. And we came here house hunting, and I was invited to an event organized, I believe, by the Allegheny Conference. And there was a presentation where they said, we need to bring more diversity to the city. So we thought that there is this growing Latina population, but in order to be sure that we are bringing US citizens, we are focusing on Puerto Rico. And what we did was to do what we know will attract them. We will have a festival with music and dance because they love that. I remember that we said maybe we shouldn't go to Pittsburgh. So we need also people who understand diversity. And I know that things, we've been here for about 8 years, have changed, but this is crucial in terms of that new vision.
Yes, another question? Yes, the woman here. You need the microphone before you start.
Thank you for your comments and the book. I think that Pittsburgh once was a global player.
Yes.
So we slipped a bit. We had many things going for us. We have 1,000 developable acres sitting around our international airport. We have one of the largest freshwater bodies of water in the world, feeding into the Mississippi. We have a labor force. What else do we have? We're a med-ed town. We're known worldwide as a med-ed town. And we're a town and a city. So we've got that kind of cool feeling. We've got that cool vibe. I was just in Europe, and the way they talk about us here is that kind of vibe. They want to come here. We've under-promoted ourselves.
we've got the Allegheny Conference and the economic development, and don't forget the Leadership Pittsburgh. I don't know what year we are in classes, but just hundreds of people that have been trained as leaders. And that's all we need, is to get those people together, sit them down in a room, don't let them out of the room until we write a marketing plan, as if Pittsburgh is the product and we are now going to market it to the world. We have everything going for us.
Well, I agree, and but I'll take it as a.
I guess the question is, how do we get those people together?
I'll give you an answer. I'll give you an answer to what I think are concrete steps. First, whether from this book, I encourage you to get the book or listen to the podcast. There are several podcasts on the book on Spotify, articles, etc. But the lesson here, I think, that is interesting is to learn from other cities, not as a recipe, but seeking to answer the question, what can I get that serves my purpose in terms of both best practices and things to avoid? That's the first thing. We need to look at other cities broadly. Our book also looks at a group of what we call global hopefuls, cities that have had and continue to have the possibility to rise to that global prominence in the region. Two of those cities, Sao Paulo and Lagos in Nigeria. So we need to look at our other cities and stop being just Eurocentric. The world is a lot diverse, more diverse than just Europe. That's one thing. Second, I think that we need to adopt a new mindset. And this has to do with two things. We need to start thinking globally. When we think about Pittsburgh, let's put Pittsburgh not in a regional or national context, but globally in the conversation. And second, we need to stop thinking about Pittsburgh as a second-tier city and imagine what Pittsburgh can be. These three cities tell an aspirational story. A fishing village, a place for people from the Northeast to escape the winters, a small village. These are aspirational stories. And that's what we need to take. We need to be thinking about Pittsburgh in a different way. And finally, and this is along the lines of what you said, we need to develop a vision for the city, a value proposition. And each of us needs to think, how can I contribute to that vision? And very important, and this is a great opportunity, how can we develop that city while we work on building a just and equitable city? We don't need to replicate many of the mistakes or negative elements and weaknesses, etc., that these cities have made as they have emerged to this level. That's the great opportunity. These are very concrete steps that we can take.
Great, thank you. We have time for one more question. The gentleman who, what's this? Visit Pittsburgh next, afterwards? Okay.
First of all, I wanted to confirm that I had a conversation with an advisor of mine from East Germany a few months ago. When I said I'm based in Pittsburgh, the first thing he said was, oh, like the Steelers? So you are, in fact, correct. Even for an East German who have never seen an American football game in his life, that is the icon of Pittsburgh. What I wanted to ask about was policy. So the most famous framework, in my opinion, of economic development is the Acemoglu and Robinson framework of sort of liberal democracy as a catalyst for development. And what we see in the London, Tokyo, New York case studies, at least over the past 70 years, are three places with liberal democracy and very, very high market economies. Looking at the three case studies for the emerging global cities, Singapore, Dubai, Miami. Miami is, of course, in a very liberal democracy kind of area. But then you have Singapore, which is a hybrid regime run by the same family for a very long time, although with some democratic aspects. And then Dubai, which is an absolute monarchy within a very, very unorthodox kind of elected, subnational monarchic system. And also, there's also the federal versus unitary sort of divide. You got Singapore, which is more unitary, a city-state, versus Miami within Florida, which is governed differently than Pennsylvania is, which is governed differently than California is. So I wanted to ask how policy, particularly in regard to democracy and in regard to federalism, plays a role in the emergence of these global cities.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting question. There are two ways briefly to answer. It's a complicated question, but two things to say. One is that clearly the nature of the regime does not drive this economic development. Because as you said, you have a country, a city in a democracy, a city-state that is a hybrid regime, and an autocracy. So that's the first element.
Okay, I
Oh.
found this on the web.
Oh, wow. Siri was going to answer the question. So that's the first element. And this is very, very important in terms of theory. And we can go a lot into that. But this is a good opportunity to mention one more thing that we discuss in the book, and the second that the book was already published, we didn't get to discuss. We also talk about the case of Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is a case of a city that had achieved that global status for the region. But we argue that this is a case of a receding global city. Because as mainland China takes over Hong Kong and starts to impose a series of restrictions on civil rights, particularly, what we see very concretely has been an exodus of companies, professionals, investment to places like Singapore. So this means that policy has a direct impact on the nature of these cities. That's one element. The second, which is something that is happening right now, is the situation in Florida. That what we have pieces of data here and there is so far a lot of anecdotal data. It will be interesting to collect this information, but we are hearing from people, we know so many people in Miami, that they are having difficulty attracting top talent these days because people don't want to go to Florida because of the policies of DeSantis. And so, is this going to have an impact? I don't know. But what we are hearing is I tried to hire the CEO for my company, and they were not interested in coming. So that's another element where policy does matter.
Great, well, thank you. Thank you all very much for your questions. I'm sorry, we need to conclude, and since Catherine is standing up, we need to end the questions.
Need to obey in this autocracy of Rand. So we are going to continue the conversation. There's more wine and food. We'll stick around until 7:45 and retrieve your cars. And in the meantime, please join me in thanking these two wonderful people for that discussion. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, Gabrielle. It was great.